Hello there. Welcome to HR Tech Talks. I am Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad to have you here today. So, had a last minute scheduling bit of fun there with our guests, and so we're going to reschedule that for another day. And last minute, I'm going to pivot, going to audible, going to whatever, adapt. We're going to change this up really quick on the fly, do a very short episode today. And I'm going to share with you something that I plan on kind of touching on in the conversation today. I've not shared this anywhere else yet. It's a brand new set of data from our new study on TA priorities, recruiting priorities, talent acquisition. So I'm going to share some of those findings with you really quick, run through a couple of these data points and share with you how the world has shifted in the last year, because I'll be transparent with you here. So we had just gathered some really intriguing data last year in March on the priorities, the shifting priorities for the TA, the recruiting leaders in our audience. And we were about to release those, and then the world blew up, as we all know. And so I took that research, and as much as I wanted to share it, I put it on the shelf and held on to that. And so the first thing I'll share with you in just a moment is some of that look back and look at the current world and see how those things have shifted and changed, because as you might imagine, there's quite a few things that have shifted and changed in the last year. So I'll show you that. I'm also going to take a little bit and walk you through a couple of the findings again. I don't want to go too deep. This is not meant to be the pure presentation. If you've got a question, pop it in there. I'm happy to answer it if I can get to it. And it'll be a short episode today as we go through, again, a unique episode of HR Tech Talks. So with that said, let's pop this up on screen. I'll share this with you and show you what we've been working on, one of a couple different studies that are kind of we're running through right now. So we heard from over 800 companies, talk to their TA leaders about what they're thinking about. And again, TA, talent acquisition. Sorry, it's my research brain shifts into that, shortening things. We talked to these different companies, and we found a couple of big themes in the data that were really intriguing. So number one, obviously we would expect this, but a lot of the changes last year were driven by the pandemic and the new requirements for virtual hiring. And so we saw some really intriguing things there. We saw some good stuff on recruiting automation, how we're using tools to make recruiting more efficient, more effective, and in some cases, even more human, which again, sounds like a paradox, I get. Some research on unbiased hiring, how companies are trying to level the playing field, be more equitable, be more inclusive in how they're approaching that. And then some interesting things, again, on talent mobility, how companies are looking to hire from within versus just looking outside the business. For me, that's a really fun one, because that's a personal passion of mine, looking at how companies are doing that. I've been doing research on it for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's so intriguing to ask this of an audience that in the past wouldn't have really cared much, honestly. 10 years ago, most recruiting leaders weren't sitting there thinking, how can we find the people inside the business and tap into their skills and leverage them and hire them first? That wasn't a priority. And yet today, as again, we'll probably touch on the data in the run through, there's some increasing interest there in that piece. So let's jump through these. Super busy. What you'll see here is dark color. Actually, you can't see with the little bar at the bottom of the screen. Let me drop that off really quick. There we go. So as you can see, the darker color here is our new data. And as you can tell, video interviewing last year exploded in the last year. So we just asked this question last month, brand new. So it wasn't look back, tell me what happened last year, but it was for the coming year, what is most important for you? And even though most companies have shifted and changed, in the coming year, still they're saying video interviewing by far hugely important going forward. We expect that. We also added a category this year for virtual hiring, kind of an all-encompassing bubble to catch all those things about how we interact with people and screen them and bring them on and make them feel welcome without actually seeing them in person. And that was number 2 on the list, followed by hiring manager relations, diversity, inclusion, and on down. So some interesting things there. We're planning on doing some cuts of this to look at what changed, what shifted, and what those movements were, which ones moved up, which ones moved down over time, because the picture from 2000, when we did this prior to this, 2017 versus 2020, there were some interesting changes. And if not for the last year's events, I think we would have seen some of that same movement, and that shook it up dramatically. Some really different kinds of things popped up in there. So a couple quick things that we saw, again, without going too crazy on all the data. Video interviews, virtual hiring, big priorities. I just said that, not just now, not just last year, but for the coming year and into 2022 is how they responded to this. So it's going to remain important and critical there. Number 2, 7 out of the 10 companies we surveyed for this, said that they are planning to do more virtual and remote hiring this year. Again, companies are thinking about, when do we come back? Are we going to come back to the office? Will we ever come back? Some companies have pledged to never do that, or pledged to put that out farther and farther to not burden their employees or with their safety. And because of those kinds of things, the vast majority of companies are planning to hire more people regardless of where they are. That's exciting because it levels the playing field. You get to hire a bigger source of talent you couldn't before, but it also adds that intriguing challenge of, how do we make sure we understand what they bring to the table, what their skills are? Can we assess them and understand whether they're a fit with the kind of things that we believe here, right? We're hard workers. We want to, all that fun stuff. The majority of companies in this said that last year exposed gaps that they had in their hiring tools and strategies. And again, that probably doesn't surprise anyone here, but out of those companies, all the companies there, 20% of them have not filled those yet. They haven't fixed those gaps. And as we see here, this is going to continue into the coming year. And so we've got to take some time. We've got to figure out how to make sure we fix those things we haven't yet, because this is what we should expect. We should expect the world as it is at this exact moment to look this way for a little bit longer, at least. And the uncertainty, the changes, the dynamic elements of it are going to remain in place. More companies, it was interesting because diversity hiring as a category fell a little bit just because the priority was, how do we screen everybody? But in terms of specifics, that continues a trend we saw early last year, where companies are looking at ways to go past, yes, we believe in diversity hiring as a just giving words to it without giving any actions behind it. And so we saw in there things like, for example, on internal talent ability, the number one way they're measuring success with that is whether they have greater diversity in the organization. So looking for ways to use all these different levers we can pull as TA leaders to increase their effectiveness and to reach that more diverse population, to be more inclusive in their hiring, all those kinds of things to really solve that problem. They've been looking for ways in the onboarding process. How do we make sure we're sharing our values so we're bringing these people in, making them feel like they belong to the organization? And then talent ability, bigger priority, and it's continuing to grow. Let's skip through a couple of these. Video interviewing boomed, as you can tell, lots of things happening there. Some interesting things on onboarding. Companies are planning to use more tools and more technology to standardize that. And the way they're connecting with people, let's say you are one of those companies that's gone virtual, the ways that companies are actually trying to make people feel more connected is more frequent check-ins. We're talking to them more often. There's more communication. We spend more time talking about the values and the culture here, telling them how we do things, why we do them, what behaviors we expect, so they don't step in it inadvertently and not know it. So they're aware of those things. Connecting new hires with a buddy, a mentor, a partner, someone who can go alongside them so that they can, hey, I've got a question I don't want to ask my manager because it's kind of weird, or I should know this. Those kind of things help people feel more comfortable. The research actually shows that 70% of how we learn is by trying things. 20% is through social interactions with other people. So putting them with a buddy can help take care of a big chunk of the learning they need by helping them along and giving them some support there. And then last but not least, they send them physical things in the mail. And I actually have watched, it's been funny in a little anecdotal thing, watching LinkedIn over the last year and seeing people that have started a new job and then posting about, here's the new cool stuff I got I'm starting this new company, new job, new position, and here's the things that they sent me. And not only is that smart to connect people, but darn, that's smart employer branding too, to say, hey, share that out to your network, tell them where you're going, and share what kind of company we are taking care of you and supporting you and recognizing you before you even started here, because that helps to create a better brand overall for the company. Let's see what else. Talk about this piece a little bit, and I won't go into all of these, but fair and unbiased hiring, more companies are prioritizing that. And we asked them how. Don't just tell me you are, but tell me how. And the number one way over here on the far right you see is we want to be more structured, more consistent. We want our processes to be more fair and equitable. So we're trying to fix the process piece before we go technology. And I'm so glad to hear that, because so many times companies say, hey, let's get a piece of technology to solve this issue we have. And if it's an underlying core structural issue, guess what? You're going to make it worse. If you've got a problem and you put technology on top of it, it's going to make you do that problem more efficiently. You'll be much faster at doing the wrong thing. So solving the process piece, really tackling that, it was great to see there. They're using tools to remove bias from job descriptions. If you haven't seen those, I need to have one of those on the HR Tech Talk show. These tools can look at the words you're using in a job description, a job ad, a job posting, and see if it's going to lean more male or female. And it can help you to gender balance those so you're not driving certain populations to your posting. So if you're using things like in a job posting, like we're looking for a hard charging, coding ninja, like that's going to definitely appeal to someone who's a male relative to a female. And there's a lot of data behind that, a lot of research behind that, but they use different data sources to help tell you what words might be triggering that and how to balance those out a little bit. Using tools to assess candidates on their actual skills and abilities. We're not looking at their names. We're not looking at where they're from, what school they went to. We ignore those things and instead we look at their actual abilities. That is a critical shift in the last 2 or 3 years. And I've been so excited to see that because even as we started using more things like video interviews, things like that, there's still been this shift in parallel in the market where employers are looking for ways to understand your skills, your abilities, your competencies, your cognitive abilities, all those kind of things, to weave those together to understand who you really are. Not just how well you can respond to this very rehearsed question of, tell me about yourself in a video interview, because that doesn't tell me anything about your actual ability to do the job. So we're looking at ways to bring those things in. And again, on down the line, lots of good stuff there, lots of good ways comes to tackle that. And I'll touch on talent mobility here really quick. I think I'm almost done with the slides I had for you that I pulled together in the last few minutes. How are you approaching this? How are you tackling this? And again, this is recruiting leaders, not HR, not learning, but recruiting leaders. And what we found was the number one way they're doing this is they say, we have these tools already in place. We're going to try to use those and adapt those. Right? Use the phrases or the saying that I love, gather a bouquet of flowers from those within reach. Or we've already got these things on hand. Let's use those to try to solve this problem. The next way, though, is that we are planning to get something, though. We have to fill this. And in the study, when we looked at those companies that are high performing, that have better revenue, retention, and employee engagement, those companies are high performers. They are 40% more likely than low performers to say, we're looking for a dedicated tool to solve this problem. So this has been a really interesting area. I wrote about that last fall, or last winter, I guess, the end of last year. I wrote about talent marketplaces because it's an area I've been watching closely in the market, what's happening there, what sort of opportunities are there, what capabilities are there. It's really intriguing. And what I'm so excited about is we're actually going to ask a version of these questions in the upcoming learning and talent development research we're going to do. So I'm kind of curious to see if they're in sync, if they're radically different in terms of how recruiting leaders respond versus other types of leaders in the organization. I'm really pumped to see how that shifts. And then how are you measuring this? I mentioned this a little bit ago. So how do you measure success there? Number one, greater diversity. We're looking for ways to measure our success here, and that's a great one. And what's interesting is you can also use diversity in the organization as a measure for obviously inclusion and those types of DEI goals. You can use that as a success metric, but we're seeing more companies overall looking at the representation at higher levels, not just saying, okay, we have 50% male and 50% female. That could be meaningless if all of the men are at the top of the scale, pay scale, and organizational org chart, and all of the women are at the bottom. And so looking at ways to do that more fairly, more evenly. And I've said for years that talent mobility gives us a tool to do that. If you're just hiring diverse individuals and you never give them a chance to move up in the organization, you're missing a chance there. I have a very good friend, Dr. David Arrington, who talks about that in his book. He talks about his experience being hired and looking forward to this career path and growing and developing and becoming a contributor. And he realized pretty quickly that the company had hired him just to meet some sort of goal and never had any intent to move him up in the business. And he ultimately left. And they missed out on someone who I'd argue is brilliant because of that lack of foresight. So looking at ways to solve for that is definitely a critical piece. So Lamise, hey there, good to see you there in the chat. If you missed the beginning, the session will be archived on YouTube, on LinkedIn. As soon as it's done recording, in just a few minutes, I'll shut down. It'll be there archived. You can go back and check that out. If anyone wants to see the data, see more of the research, you're curious about something, or you missed something I went too quickly, or I didn't talk about it, we don't know more, any of those, you can ping us, research at lhra.io for Lighthouse Research and Advisory. This is what I do. I love research. I love data, not for the value it has inherently, because by itself, it's just a bunch of numbers. But if it helps us to make a better decision, it helps us to decide what to do next, what to quit doing because it's a terrible practice. Anything that data can do around those types of things, I think, is really powerful. So I'm excited to continue delving into the research, digging into it. We're going to do some cuts on the SMB market, what happens differently for smaller employers and mid-sized employers versus the enterprise side. We're going to do some cuts on high turnover organizations. I already have some of those things. I didn't want to throw too much out there today, but I have some high turnover cuts and other things like that, looking at how companies have shifted and changed and what's next. So excited to share more of this research as we go along. And thank you for hanging out with me today. I will be back next week with another episode of HR Tech Talks, talk to another innovative HR technology provider and talent and learning in HR tech that's solving problems, that's helping employers. And I love diving into that. And I know you do too. So thank you so much for joining me today, hanging out with you for a little bit on this impromptu research overview of some of the new data coming out from Lighthouse. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.